So this video is long overdue, but I just got the a6400 and I haven't made a best settings video for this camera. And so today I'm gonna show you how to set up this camera to shoot photos and videos in just under 10 minutes. What?
Okay, let's begin. So I've already reset the camera to factory settings, and that way I can quickly walk you through the settings as you see it. Okay, so when you turn on the camera, it's gonna open up the language screen. So I'm gonna select English. We're gonna skip the date for now because we are on the clock. Get it? Oh, and before we begin, make sure that on the top dial we are set to manual photography, which is the M. Okay, so go ahead and hit the menu button, and we're gonna go tab by tab, page by page, starting with photography. So for file format, I always choose RAW. Next page. I don't mess with any of this, so we're gonna go to the next page. Drive mode, we're gonna stick to single, but if you do like shooting faster, then go ahead and select a faster shooting rate. For interval shooting, this is where you set your time-lapse settings. And so if you want to turn on interval shooting, make sure it's turned on, and then you can make your adjustments over here. But if you do want to shoot just normal photos, then make sure that this option is turned off. Otherwise, you will activate the time-lapse feature. Okay, so next page. We're going to go back to this in a second, so let's skip that for now. Let's see, focus mode, we're going to set it to continuous autofocus. Good for photo and video. Everything else we're going to keep the same. Keep the same. Oh, we're flying through. ISO setting. This really only applies if you choose to shoot auto ISO, at which point you might want to bracket it. This camera doesn't do the best in low light, so I typically don't shoot higher than 3200. And so we're just going to keep right there. So my minimum will be 100 and my max ISO will be 3200. Cool. So moving on. Next page, next page, next page. White balance, we want to be consistent, so let's just choose daylight for now, and you can always change it depending on the environment you're in. Everything else I keep the same. Since we're shooting RAW, the picture profile doesn't really matter. Next page. Next page. Everything else is set. Next page. I don't mess with any of this stuff that often, so we're just going to leave that for now. And now we're ready for our video settings, which is the next tab over. So before we adjust our movie settings, make sure on the top dial we are set to the movie icon. All right, now we're good. Okay, so exposure mode, I always shoot in manual because I want to be able to adjust the ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed all manually. Okay, moving on, we're going to set our 4K settings first. We'll be shooting at 24 frames a second with a bitrate of 60 megabits per second, which is good for most videos that I do, especially for YouTube. But if I ever do client work, then I'll bump it up to 100 megabits. It just puts more data in the footage, which makes it a little bit easier to color grade in post. Yes, it is 8-bit footage, but every little bit helps. I don't mess with those two, so next page. Drive speed will be set to normal. Tracking sensitivity will be set to responsive because I find that the most natural. Audio record level, I set to 7. That's usually good with shotgun mics like the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus or the Deity D3 Pro. If you use a lav mic, then levels 1 to 3 are usually good. Or if you decide to use the internal mic of the camera, then 12 to 15 is my recommendation. But for now, we're just going to set it to 7. Okay, next page. Don't mess with that. Don't mess with that. For zoom setting, I actually change it to clear image zoom because it allows the camera to actually zoom in on any lens, even a prime lens. It's not a digital zoom, but the camera actually zooms in on the sensor without much picture quality loss. So that's pretty cool. Next page. Oh, that looks good. Next page. Looks good. Okay, so the custom keys. This is where you get to assign different features on certain buttons on the camera. So let's go ahead and click on the first option, which is the custom key for photography. So let's go ahead and start customizing. So for this one, I actually changed to autofocus manual control toggle, and that way I can just push the button right over here to activate manual or autofocus. Number 2, which is when you flip the switch down over here, we're actually going to change that to focus area, and that way I can quickly choose what type of focus I want, whether it's in the center, wide, or a specific zone. For number 3, which is the trash icon over there, I'm actually going to change that to zoom, because remember that clear image zoom feature that we talked about? Well, I want to be able to access that feature by easily pressing this button over here, and so we're just going to assign that feature to that button. There we go. Perfect. Next page. Okay, so now we're talking about the wheel over here. The center button, I like choosing picture profile. It makes it easier for me to change picture profiles if I need to, depending on the environment. There we go. Drive mode, keep the same. ISO, keep the same. Exposure compensation, I don't really mess with that too much, and so we're going to change that to white balance. There we go. Cool, perfect. Next page, and the custom button in the front, which is right next to the shutter button. That's set to focus mode. I'm cool with that. And finally, the button on the lens. This doesn't apply to the lens I'm using now. That typically applies to G Master lenses, which you can assign another feature to. But for now, we're just going to ignore that. Okay, press menu, let's go back. We should be good for custom keys, because if you go down to the next option, all the features are automatically defaulted to the photography custom keys, which you already just made. So in other words, all those custom keys will apply for photography and video. Okay, so we're gonna go down to function menu setting, and this opens up a menu that gives you quick access to your favorite settings. So whether you change the ISO a lot or the focus area, or even switch memory recalls, whatever your favorite settings are, place them here. So for example, here I can do shoot mode if I wanted to. There you go. Focus, let's just do, just for example, choose that, and so on and so forth. So obviously that's all preference, and so we're just gonna move on from here. Let's go to the next page. The only thing I changed on this page is the function of touch operation, which I changed to touch tracking. And that way, on the monitor, if you touch a certain object, a tracking box will pop up and follow that object wherever it goes. So definitely one of the best features on the a6400. Okay, so moving on. So next tab is gonna allow you to connect your phone to your camera. We're gonna skip that because you can do that on your own. Okay, moving on. Next page, we're gonna skip that. Skip. Monitor brightness. We're gonna leave that to manual, even though there is an option for sunny weather, which makes the screen a lot brighter, which is really helpful when you're shooting outside. But the image on the monitor doesn't display an accurate image, and so I just leave the brightness to manual. This page looks pretty good. I just adjust the volume settings to the highest, and so if I ever do playback, then obviously you want to be able to hear it. Next page, display quality I set to high. Power save time I set to 2 minutes. Auto power off temperature I set to high. Now, even though the temperature of this camera will rise after a long while, from my experience, the a6400 has never overheated, which is one of the reasons why I chose to get the a6400. Okay, moving on. All that looks pretty good to me. Next page, that looks good, looks good, looks good, and looks good. Okay, cool. So now go press the menu. And since our video settings are at 24 frames a second, we want to make sure that our shutter speed is double the frame rate. And so we're just going to change the shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. Here we go. We're going to lower the f-stop as much as we can, because why not? And I can adjust accordingly if I need to. ISO, I'll just keep it at 100, and I can always change that if need be. And lastly, let's go set our picture profile. I like using high log gamma, and you can find that under PP10. And so go ahead and press right, and I like using HLG2 with the color mode set to Rec 709. And so we're going to press the center button. All that looks pretty good. So now we're going to register our 4K 24p video settings. So go to menu, we're going to go back to the first tab, go to page 4, and click on memory, select 1. And now your 4K 24p settings are set to memory recall 1. So now let's change up our camera settings to film in slow motion. So let's go back to tab 2. We're going to go to file format and change to XAVC SHD, which opens up the 120 frames a second option. We're going to choose 60 megabits as the bit rate for now. Again, if I'm shooting stuff for our clients, I'll bump it up to 100, but 60 is fine. Okay, we're going to go to the next page. And since we're filming in slow motion, you want to make sure that the drive speed is set to fast, because when you slow down in post, the autofocus speed will look a little bit more normal versus choosing a slower drive speed like normal or slow. Okay, so press the menu and we'll make our final adjustments. Since we're filming in 120, we want to double our frame rate in our shutter speed. So let's go ahead and go up to 250. And I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and register those settings. Go to menu, go back to tab 1, page 4, hit 2, and now your slow motion settings are registered. And so if you want to recall your 4K 24p settings, on the top dial, switch over to MR, which is memory recall. And now you can choose your 4K 24p settings, or if you want to switch back to slow motion, select memory recall 2 to load in your slow motion settings. Pretty cool, huh? So one final step, on the top dial, let's go back to M to open up our photography settings. Let's go ahead and turn picture profiles off for our photography settings. And everything else looks pretty good. Obviously, you can change your focus area, drive mode, focus mode, but whatever settings you make, whenever you switch to the M on the top dial, these settings for photography will appear. So in a way, it acts as its own memory recall. And so for my workflow, if I want to shoot in 4K, I go in the top dial, select memory recall, MR, I choose number 1. Now I'm shooting at 4K at 24p. If I decide to shoot slow motion, I hit the function button, And over here, I choose memory recall number 2. And so now I'm ready to shoot some slow motion. But if I wanted to switch to photography, on the top dial, I switch to M. And the photography settings that I made before are automatically loaded. And that, my friends, is how you set up the a6400 in under 10 minutes.
All right, guys, well, that is it for me. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Obviously, those settings were for my liking, my preferences, and so use that as a proxy so that you can decide the best way to set up your camera. Other than that, go out there, take your camera, and go shoot something awesome. Thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell, all those good things, and I'll see you in the next video.